It was on this very day, August 18th in 2022, which was a Thursday, when Sports for Beginners officially began. Welcome, everybody, to the 3-year anniversary, rather, of Sports for Beginners. This is Sports for Beginners. I am Scott McGregor. It's episode 24 of season 4, and it's our special season 4, I should say, 3-year anniversary program. Enjoy. Let's get going. Welcome to Sports for Beginners. This is the show where I cover the Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Blue Jays, and take you on a journey through the world of sports. From the fans' perspective, here is your host, Scott McGregor. Let's have some fun. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? What's up, everybody? My name is Scott McGregor. Thank you so much for being with us. Thursday, August 18th, 2022, Sports for Beginners began. As I have mentioned in previous episodes before I welcome you in, we are on season 4 of the podcast. This is episode 24 of the show, current season, which is season 4. We have a lot to get to and a lot to look back on. Unfortunately, we will not be showing you the pictures of all of our achievements as of late that we had saved, but we will still look back on those achievements. And also, fortunately, we will be looking back in just a little bit. We will be looking back at previous interviews from previous seasons, like one that we have on deck, my conversation, my first ever conversation with Lindsay Ayala. Erica is the host of Locked On Kraken, but she is also hosting with Rachel Donner, the Women's Hockey Report, available only on Locked On NHL. Check out the Locked On NHL podcast for all things NHL related, and check out the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by Locked On NHL with Erica and Rachel, Saturdays, going over the PWHL and everywhere else in women's hockey. We'll get to Erica's interview momentarily. But first, welcome once again to our 3-year anniversary. I am your host, Scott McGregor, joined as always by my co-hosts Ali Moosa and Thomas McGregor. However, it is just me, your host today, as it has been since our 2-year anniversary. And of course, I won't get into the specifics of how that went down between Ali and Thomas, but that aside, they were with me when we started. Since then, we've had Ryan Talbot on 3 times, I believe, this year. Well, not this year, but 3 times in the time span that we have been on. We have had Erica on once. We have had Hunter Hoodies on as well. We have had the wonderful Brock Richardson, host of the Neutral Zone, on the program as well. We also have had in our special Christmas programs, we've had the likes of Ryan Payton and other people that we were able to get on. Of course, we have had a summer bash during the timeline that broadcast map remained all over the map. And of course, we also had an opportunity to catch up with Sienna Tregiani of Sienna T Radio, who also hosted with Ali Spicy Techie. All right. So there have been a lot of things that the podcast has endured. We switched recently from Blue Jays game recap to Blue Jays weekly recap. That will return following the next episode of this 2-week episode event, including our celebration, which is today. And of course, we are kind of moving the Penguins post-game programming to on the ice and behind the benches. But there is going to be a Penguins weekly recap show here on Sports for Beginners Only, and that will be starting up this season. I will still be in the host chair on the ice and behind the benches with Penguins postgame, and I will be doing a Penguins postgame rewind here on Sports for Beginners, as both on the ice and behind the benches and Sports for Beginners will have Penguins hockey next season, which is this upcoming season. But the only difference is here on Sports for Beginners, it will be called Penguins Postgame Rewind. We'll explain more about that as we get closer to hockey season. All right, I think it's about time we take our first look back interview. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, sports fans alike, I present to you the first interview and first stop on our celebration tour. Give it up for the one, the only, here's my conversation with the one, the only, Erica Lindsay Ayala. We will stop it before the end of the interview and take our first commercial break. And then when we come back, we will finish off that interview and get into where the podcast currently stands as far as audiences from around the globe. And of course, we will take a look at our top 10 episodes later on in the show. Will they be on a shared screen? Probably not. What is on a shared screen at this time is what we are going to take you to. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Sports for Beginners podcast studio. My name is Scott McGregor, and I am your host of this program. And I am also the co-host of the combined podcast on the All Over the Map podcast called Sports Reactions. However, like I've mentioned in recent shows, Sports Reactions was discontinued, so we will not be doing any more of those shows on All Over the Map, but stay tuned for updates on that. Joining me today in the studio is the host of the Daily Centric podcast for the Seattle Kraken, and that is also a host of the Locked On NHL podcast's every other Friday segment called the Women's Hockey Spotlight, available on the Locked On Podcast Network, which is, as it's always mentioned in its tagline, your team every day. We are joined by the one and only Erica Lindsay Ayala. And Erica, as I've just mentioned, is the host of Locked On Kraken and the host of the Every Other Friday program on the Locked On NHL podcast, Women's Hockey Spotlight. Ladies and gentlemen, with this all being said, please welcome to the program today your host of Locked On Kraken and Locked On NHL's Women's Hockey Spotlight, Erica Lindsay Ayala. Erica, how are you doing today? I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you to the program. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here with you, Scott. I appreciate you reaching out and for giving me such a gracious introduction, but I'm doing okay today. I am back in my hometown of New York, so I'm on the road. I don't live in New York anymore these days, but it's nice to be back in New York, and it's nice to be able to talk some hockey with you today.
All right. So with that being said, before we get into the main topics, talking Dave Haxtell, we'll talk a little mental health, and of course, we'll get a women's hockey spotlight sort of perspective on the great game of hockey. Before we get started, though, could you please tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what it has been like to cover the Seattle Kraken on the Locked On Podcast Network?
Well, sure thing. I guess I kind of gave a little teaser there, but I grew up in New York. I'm the eldest daughter of 3 girls growing up here in New York City and the surrounding areas. I played a lot of sports growing up. Baseball was and probably still is my main passion. I started playing baseball, t-ball, and then that evolved into other sports, with the exception of hockey, as fate would have it. But yeah, so I grew up playing sports and have always been around sports and played softball in college at Elon University. And then I went to work in the nonprofit sector, working at a lot of different child advocacy organizations. And basically what that means, or at least the work that I did there, is working alongside families, children and families, and organizations that serve children and families. So healthcare providers, schools, community centers, etc., and creating good policy to be beneficial to parents and families. And the work I specifically did was to be the liaison. So you have policy writers who kind of do that more often than not in a vacuum, or at least they're always talking in New York State. Albany is our capital. So they're talking to officials, elected officials. But my role was to take what we were doing as an organization with elected officials and make it accessible to the people who would benefit in hopefully from the programs that we were advocating for. And anyway, so the way that I got to covering the Kraken is that I had started right around the time that the National Women's Hockey League started. They had a team in New York. And long story short, my sister and I, one of my sisters, Jessie, we were going to the Riveters games in Brooklyn, and I'm a pretty curious person. I started learning who was writing about the league and the teams and the players, and that led to opportunities to come on podcasts.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this current time, we are actually receiving an update here on the score. Only Pittsburgh Penguins fans, there is a new suitor to buy the Pittsburgh Penguins. Just to be clear, it's not Jeff Hoffman, but could the Hoffman family potentially buy the Pittsburgh Penguins? What does that mean for the Penguins' era in the NHL? I'll talk more about my thoughts on that a little bit later, but that is some breaking news that I'm getting from the score as we look ahead. Of course, I know there's a lot of action around the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially with whether or not my boy and the Penguins captain, also known as the Canadian, Sidney Crosby, whether he will stay with Pittsburgh for the rest of his career or he will finish his career elsewhere. To be honest with you, let me talk about that for a second before we get back to Erica. I personally believe that Crosby will stay in Pittsburgh. I don't believe, given what is going on with the Penguins, unless they are absolutely certain they want to move on from the core, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, Christopher LeCamp, if they want to move on from 71, 87, and 58, that's up to them. And specifically, that's up to everybody involved in the Penguins organization. That's not up to me. That's also not up to, I guess, the current owners, Fenway Sports Group. That's a conversation that Fenway Sports Group, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and players like Evgeny Malkin, Crosby, and Letang are going to have between themselves. Do I think Crosby's going anywhere? Absolutely not. But I will keep my eyes peeled, even on episodes that have previously aired of 32 Thoughts, the podcast. I will keep my eyes peeled for any updates on Crosby's situation. I do not believe that he will leave Pittsburgh. I really don't think that will happen. I'm also going to keep an eye on DK Pittsburgh Sports for DK's Daily Shot of Penguins. And of course, on the Locked On Podcast Network, I'm going to keep an eye on Locked On NHL and, of course, Locked On Penguins. I mentioned Hunter Hoodies earlier on, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on those podcasts. Maybe I'll also keep a close eye on suitors for Sidney Crosby, should he leave Pittsburgh. I'll keep an eye on those Locked On podcasts, should he be on his way out of Pittsburgh. I don't think it's going to happen personally, but let me ask the question one more time. I asked it during the hockey season last year. Penguin fans, would you still remain a Pittsburgh Penguins fan? And these are for the ones who love Sidney Crosby. Would you still remain a Pittsburgh Penguins fan if Crosby were to leave Pittsburgh? Again, for Crosby fans of the Penguins, would you still remain a Pittsburgh Penguins hockey fan if Crosby left Pittsburgh? That is my question to Penguins hockey fans that are, like me, a fan of Sidney Crosby. All right, let's go back to our interview that we were currently listening to. That was a quick breaking news story, and I brought up a little bit of Crosby over the course of that training. Once we have hit the 12-minute mark of the interview, we will take our first time out of the show.
That's like what we're doing right now, and eventually led to an opportunity for me to write more regularly about the league. And then the league actually tapped me to be a broadcaster by the second season. And things moved pretty fast, but flash forward, after covering my first year of hockey, women's hockey, I then covered other sports, including, for those maybe watching on video, I'm wearing a WNBA shirt. And I then started with the Locked On organization through a mutual colleague that was covering WNBA. And I was actually a host of Locked On Women's Basketball, which, as you mentioned, our motto is your team every day, but we would have multiple hosts. And so I had 2 of the 5 days where I was talking WNBA. And around that time, I got a message from the coordinator for the NHL side of things, because the Locked On Network knew that I was covering women's hockey, and they had some openings for NHL hosts and wanted to know if I would host a show. At the time, the teams that they had available, I didn't know much about those teams. Again, I never played hockey. I was not covering NHL hockey at the time, but I had been tapped to write a few stories for, at the time, NHL Seattle. They were not the Seattle Kraken yet, but I wrote a story on Willie O'Ree about for NHL Seattle. And then eventually NHL Seattle tapped me to be one of their writers for their website for the launch of the name and the branding. And so once I did that, I got to learn a little bit more about now the Seattle Kraken. I liked what they were doing from an organizational perspective, and that they gave me the freedom to write about women's hockey for them. I wrote about, again, Willie O'Ree for them. I wrote about the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes in Nova Scotia. And I wanted to dabble a little bit more in hockey. And so I said to the Locked On Network, well, I'm not necessarily interested in any of these shows, but when you're ready to launch the Kraken show, let me know. And I listed a lot of the credentials I just told you, and the rest is history. I was the and have been the only host of Locked On Kraken.
Yes. And for those who don't know, unless you've been listening to Locked On Kraken every day, again, that's your team every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. Erica actually was starting the show amid the first season of Seattle Kraken hockey. So since then, she has also been in news with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, if I'm not mistaken. And the fourth question I had for you is, I understand that you also cover the women's version of the great game of hockey. So could you please tell us how the idea of a segment based on women's hockey on the Locked On NHL podcast every other Friday came up? And can you please give me some examples, if it's all right with you, please?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. As I mentioned, Scott, I started with the Locked On Network covering women's sports on the women's basketball side. So I knew that whether it was Locked On NHL, which covers an entire league, or even Locked On Women's Basketball, which covers multiple leagues and internationally, that there was a model where we could cover not just a specific team, but kind of maybe we call it a genre or a topic of sport. And so pretty early on, since I have been covering Locked On, and Scott, I'm so grateful that you are an everyday listener and OGer, but you know that I've been sprinkling in history, women's hockey history, in my coverage, including working with the amazing organization Women's Pro Hockey to Seattle. And one of our very first episodes was walking through the history of hockey in the Pacific Northwest with Zoe, who is an amazing historian, but also in that history, making sure that we included women's hockey history. And it's always been something that I've done on Locked On Kraken. And as I know you know, I mention a lot that my references for hockey come from the women's game. I've covered the Olympics. Well, technically, I also covered the men's side, but I covered primarily the women's game at the Olympics, at World Championships, at Frozen Fours, and I've done men's Frozen Four as well now, mostly for the Olympics and the Frozen Four for Maddie Beniers through Locked On Kraken. I don't ever, I remember, let me put it this way. I remember when I was asked to speak about being tapped as the host for Locked On Kraken, someone said to me something akin to, oh, well, this must be a step up for you because now you're covering men's hockey. And I understand where that sentiment comes from. But again, I came to the Locked On Kraken show already having covered Olympians and interviewing Olympians and going to national and international tournaments. So I don't see it for me as a step up per se. I see it, if anything, as just expanding my hockey coverage. And so that's always been my philosophy. So early on, when I became a part of the Locked On NHL, kind of subsect of the Locked On Podcast Network, I wanted to see if we could get something similar to Locked On Women's Basketball for the hockey side. At the time, we had the league that I mentioned, the National Women's Hockey League, rebranded to the Premier Hockey Federation. The Premier Hockey Federation, as we're talking, has been acquired, but I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But I really felt that between just coming off an Olympics, again, I was at Beijing and covered that game and have had commissioners and all kinds of people. Jessica Campbell, you mentioned the Coachella Valley Firebirds, that we see so much influx of the women's game into at the NHL level in a broader way than we've seen in years past. And so it just felt like time. So ultimately, the compromise that we have made is to have a segment every other Friday to try and get up a listenership. And that would not have been my first choice, but I also understand the economics, or I should say, I understand people's concerns surrounding the economics, but it's been a lot of fun. And I have had Commissioner Reagan Carey of the aforementioned Premier Hockey Federation on the show. We've had Liz Knox from the PWHPA. We have had a bunch of other people, and it's been exciting. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing to grow the viewership and listenership for the Women's Hockey Spotlight. And for those who are familiar with the Locked On Network, we have 3 segments. So it's really anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes in one show, in a 30-minute show where we're talking about hockey, women's hockey. And it's not everything that I want. I would at minimum like an entire day dedicated to women's hockey, if not an entire show. But baby steps, we'll start there.
Yeah. All right, so we went up to the 13-minute and 39-second mark of the interview. That interview will continue on our show momentarily. We do have one more interview on deck, so that will be another previous conversation we had. That will be our conversation with the one, the only, Barack Richardson. We did not know at the time of our interview, we did not know what the future of the neutral zone was going to look like. To my knowledge, we now know that the neutral zone is still a podcast working around the clock looking for sponsorships, but they are also currently run by the Ontario Para Network, the Ontario Sports Para Network. And I look forward to talking more with Brock about para sports in the nearby future, as well as other big sports like baseball, football, hockey, basketball, maybe on one of our next future episodes, maybe in season 5 or down the road in season 4, we'll dedicate an episode to women's basketball and get Erica to come on and talk a little women basketball. We will see what we can do. Erica's interview will continue following our look at our audience, our top 10 episodes, and of course, momentarily, right after the break, we will tell you what we have accomplished over these last 3 years as we enter into year 4. 3 years of celebrating sports for beginners will return in a moment. Stay with us. More from Erica's interview and more look back on the past 2 years going into the end here of year 3 as we celebrate 3 years of the podcast when we continue. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Seattle Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on Seattle Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on Seattle Radio.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
It's episode 24 of season 4. It's the 3-year anniversary of Sports for Beginners. As I just put out in a WhatsApp community I called the Sports for Beginners Network. We'll talk about that in Friday's episode, which is the episode following this one. As mentioned, this is a 2-week episode drop. And of course, we have a show for you Thursday, August 2025. That will be dropping very likely on Friday, August 22nd, 2025. On that show, you will get an update on the previously released Toronto Raptors NBA schedule for the 2025-2026 season. You will also hear what's been going around in the PWHL on another segment of Time for Some Women's Hockey Talk. That will be happening during Last Call. And of course, we will be kicking things off on the baseball side, looking ahead to what the Blue Jays face as they head into the final month of the 2025 season. Looking back at the 2 out of 3 homestand series against the Cubs and the Rangers. That's right, they took 2 out of 3 against the Rangers and the Cubs when the Cubbies and the Rangers came into town. Just since we're on the topic of the Blue Jays, before we get back to the interview that we were rolling along with, as I said, the Cubbies and the Rangers each took 1 game out of 3 against the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays took 2 of 3 from each of those series. The next homestand will feature the Minnesota Twins from Monday to Wednesday, if I am not mistaken. I'm just going to double check here on my phone the Blue Jays schedule for that homestand, but that will be complete with Looney Dogs night on the Tuesday night. And yes, that is a Monday to Wednesday series next week. They will also face, during that homestand, they will also face next weekend. Of course, not this weekend, which is against Miami. They will face the weekend after that series with Miami. They will face off with the Milwaukee Brewers, who to this point have had quite a year. They broke a franchise record in wins, going up to 14-0 before dropping their first game in as many games yesterday. Speaking of the Brewers and the Cubbies, they are underway right now as the only game on the slate underway right now. And the Cubbies have the bases loaded in the bottom of the 4th, but they trail 1-0. The Brewers lost to the Reds in 10 innings yesterday to cap off a 14-game winning streak that would halt at 14 and go into a 1-game losing streak after the Reds beat the Brewers 3-2 yesterday. All right, let's go back to our featured interview. But before we do, we've opened up our screen here. You can see our overview. This is where we stand as of our recording right now. We have 10 plays in the last 30 days. We haven't gained any followers yet in the last 30 days, and we only have 1 consumption hour for those of you listening to the show on Spotify. That's okay. When we look at our overall, we have 6,465 streams and downloads, and we have a total of 17 Spotify followers. Thank you so much for giving us a follow. Off we go to the audience. We'll start with the geographic locations. We have currently reached a couple more areas in Canada, which over the past 2 years has been our big supporter. The big supporter right now in Canada is the province of Ontario, but we have reached Quebec, Saskatchewan, BC, as in British Columbia, but BC for short, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and the home of the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames, Alberta. Ottawa and Toronto would count in the province of Ontario because Ottawa is the capital of Canada. Ontario is also the capital of, I believe, Toronto. But regardless, we'll leave that for another time. Canada and the United States are the only geographic locations in Spotify. Canada holding a 75% lead. United States is behind at 25%, but that's okay. Speaking of the United States, when we go across all platforms, we have also equipped the area of Czech Republic, Vietnam, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, bonjour to our friends over in France. We also have Armenia, the Philippines, Venezuela is also listening to our show. Thank you so much for checking that out. For checking us out, I should say. We have listeners in South Korea, Japan, Solomon Islands, Serbia, as well as Guyana. I'm not sure if I was saying that right. If I didn't, I apologize. Republic of Lithuania is also listening. Thank you. We also have Brazil, India, Ireland, Thailand, Sweden, Italy, Brazil, Belgium, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, Poland, Bangladesh is also listening to us as well. Welcome aboard. Thank you for checking us out. Hungary is also there. Both Russia and Ukraine are listening to the show as well. South Africa is also there. And we also have China in the area. Of the United States, we have regions Virginia, North Carolina, Colorado, rather states, I should say. And we are going into Utah as well, Tennessee, Texas. These are under region. Texas, California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. The list goes on, but it goes all the way down to Kentucky. And right now, Virginia with a big lead here. We only have Ashburn and Bristol, Virginia, listening to us right now. North Carolina is catching up. It's in the only city right there. Down in Denver, down in Colorado, we have Longmont with a huge lead over Denver. Let's go to Pittsburgh. We recently picked up a new listener city in Pennsylvania besides Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which, by the way, Pittsburgh is the main leader at 50%. Philadelphia coming in at 33.3%. Welcome to the broadcast. Listeners in Pennsylvania from Pottstown. We're glad to have you with us from Pottstown, Pennsylvania. From Utah, we welcome West Valley City and Orem. Orem is one of the cities joining us from the state of Utah. In Minnesota, do we have any more people catching us up here, or are we just stuck to two? We are just stuck to two, St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minneapolis with a bigger lead than St. Paul, but that's okay. Oh, by the way, I wanted to get to our platforms here. By devices, people are utilizing the web browser %. Some people are also utilizing Podcast Guru. Some of our listeners, I should say, are actually utilizing Podcast Guru, 14.9%. 6% TuneIn, 6% Spotify. Other has received 9%. What about devices? Let's see. Still kicking butt here. The Android has actually moved out in front of the Mac, iPhone, Windows, iPad, and others with a 35.8% lead. The Mac has 20.9%. Just about 21% of our listeners listen on the Mac. Our iPhone listeners, just about 20% of you, not necessarily 20%, but about 19.4. Not very many listeners listen on Windows devices, 7.5. iPad users at 3% and other 13.4. Our audience demographic gender, well, we're trying to provide some good content for our female listeners, maybe some non-binary content would be in the works and not specified. Over the last 30 days, our demographic at age has been ranging from ages 23 to 27 years old, and and with the content we've been bringing out, the male have been the common denominator in our demographic. But let's take a quick look in the last all-time range. Where have we been ranging from there as far as gender, audience, demographics, and Spotify? Still, the big leader is ages 23 to 27. We are reaching audiences at 60 years old and plus. Ages 45 to 59, not quite there. Ages 18 to 22, we have about 24.4% of you listening. 28 to 34, only 0.6% of you are listening to the podcast. Ages 35, to 44, 1.4%. And 45 to 59 years old, only 1.1% of you have been listening. It's okay. It's okay. The males still have a commanding lead, even in the last 90 days. I'll get to the episode ranking a little bit later, but we went over our audience demographics right off of the jump. And we went over an overview as well. So a lot to look forward to over these next 30 days, as well as our episode ranking. We'll do that in a moment. Before we go to what we are talking about and rather celebrating, the achievements that we have gotten over the past timeline of our show's existence, let's go back and see what else we can grab from our ongoing interview featured, which is Erica, Lindsay, Ayala. We're going to play that for you again. This was an interview where we did talk about Dave Haxtell when he was, I believe, I don't know if he still is with the Kraken, but he was extended by the Kraken at the time of our interview. Let's hear more from Erica and my conversation. Brock's conversation coming up before the show is up. Will we finish that conversation before the show is up? Probably not, but that's okay. It will continue into the next episode before we get into what that episode will entail. With that, let's go back to the interview. Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. So that brings me back to the Kraken for a second. So obviously the Kraken had made some history last season, but before we get to that question, I want to ask you, could you tell us who stood out to you this past season, and do you see them returning to the team?
Sure. Well, there are some players that stood out that are no longer with the team, so I guess I'll just start there. I think that Daniel Sprong, he came in on a PTO after coming to the Seattle Kraken at the trade deadline, and that was a big story. And as far as some of our fourth liners or players that, again, have moved on, Daniel Sprong, as of the time we're talking, Scott has signed with the Detroit Red Wings, but he definitely stood out. And in the last handful of shows, I've been talking about how the Kraken are going to have to, especially, for their bottom six forwards, are going to have to figure out how to recreate and replicate some of his productivity, especially offensively. Another player that I will be honest, and listeners know I was a little bit on the fence about, but that was Morgan Geekie. I think when it comes to being a player that we could plug and play, not just as a centerman, as other players kind of moved around, including Yanni Gourde, who we know who can play the wing and has played center, or other players like Ryan Donato, who's one of my absolute favorites and is also gone and has gone to Chicago. But, so those are some of the players that definitely stepped up. But again,
all right. So when we get down to it, I do want to, we're actually going to get this out of the way just to get it out there. So With the changes happening all around the NHL, I'm curious about your thoughts on the Dave Haxtell extension. So, when Dave Haxtell was extended as the coach of the Kraken, what was going through your mind when you first heard the Kraken say that we have extended head coach Dave Haxtell?
I thought it was a good move. And again, going back to some of the players that I just mentioned who are not with the team but made big strides, that's a part of Dave Haxtell building a very strong culture. That also is reinforced with Ron Francis, our general manager, who was also extended, mind you, coming out of our playoff run. But, the Seattle Kraken are building a very strong culture. Dave Haxtell got a lot of heat that I thought was at times unwarranted in season one, where the Seattle Kraken did not have a great season. And then all of a sudden things changed. But what I liked is that he was able to really build a strong culture to the point where other players, to answer your other question a little bit more thoroughly, players like Vince Dunn, who we were able to avoid arbitration with and has been extended, who had a great season. He talked about wanting to come back and wanting to, even outside of the most recent extension, play for Seattle for several years to come. You even hear veteran players like Jaden Schwartz and Jordan Eberle saying those kinds of things, or Jared McCann, who we also extended in the middle of our first season, saying things like that. And I do think that Dave Haxtell is an integral part of the culture that we're building with the Seattle Kraken. So I thought it was great to extend him.
Yes, and you mentioned Jared McCann, and for those who may not know, Jared McCann was also a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he did come over to Seattle. Not exactly sure how that happened, but he did leave Pittsburgh before coming to the Kraken. So you can look that up just to make sure I'm getting that correct, but I do know that he's no longer a Penguins.
Yes, and I can fill in the holes there. So Jared McCann, as you mentioned, yes, representing the Steel City there, but was actually, I believe, was traded to Toronto, actually played for Toronto, but then was exposed in the expansion draft. And so that is how Jared McCann in the expansion draft, which I was able to cover for Locked On Kraken, one of our first events for the show, that's how he ends up in Seattle. And it's funny that you mentioned Jared McCann. A lot of players, Vince Dunn and Eberle and so many, Yanni Gourde, are players who obviously were exposed in the expansion draft. But what they've said is that, and what a lot of them, even Andre Burakovsky, who we picked up last free agency, these are players who were not necessarily the player on their former teams, but they were role players. And so the opportunity to come to Seattle and show that they can be a go-to guy in the NHL was a part of the reason, especially for those who come over in free agency, why they wanted to come to Seattle. And then another thing that they talk about, speaking of Dave Haxtell, is how it's a team by committee. And so everyone has an opportunity to contribute. And again, that comes for me from Dave Haxtell and the rest of the coaching staff.
Indeed. All right. So going to number 5 here, this comes back to women's hockey. So could you please tell me what has been your favorite part of covering the women's side of the great game of hockey? And can you please give me some examples if you're okay with them, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the women's game is the easiest way, but I think it also has parallels to why I love covering the Seattle Kraken. I love being a part of a process from the ground up. And so I literally was a writer for NHL.com/Kraken when they named the team. I have been able to be a part of this Seattle team in their first playoff run. And that's the same feeling that it feels like a lot of times. And although I don't always agree it should be this way, you get to see the come up, as you know, I like to say. You get to see a lot of the game in its pure form, without the glitz, without the glamour, and people having to figure out not only how to make a team function, but how to make a franchise or sometimes even a league be effective and be marketable. And I have gotten to see that up close and personal with the women's game. The best example that I can give, since you asked for an example, is that I remember covering Blake Bolden when no one would interview her after games, or very few people would interview her after games unless it was Black History Month, because she is a Black woman, a defender in women's hockey, and she's a dynamic player. There are so many things that she has been a pioneer for, not just as a Black woman, but as a hockey player. And I've been able to see Blake's growth and development every step of the way. Now, as we speak here, Blake Bolden works for the LA Kings. She works for ESPN, and she is heralded as one of, again, not only the pioneers of the women's game, but one of the more up and coming, rising, successful personalities in hockey. And I got to spend a lot of time with her, again, when very few people knew who she was. She's been a part of different documentaries and different events where the curators or the directors of those events knew of Blake Bolden because of some of the conversations and some of the writing that I was able to do and then share with them. And so that's what's been great about covering women's hockey and women's sports. I just like to be there from the ground up and be one of the first voices to highlight something that's new and innovative.
All right. Okay, so sometimes it can be hard to run a podcast on a day-to-day basis. So when we think about our health and our mental health, more likely, or our physical health, could you please share with us or tell us some examples of what you try to do to help you in your daily routine, especially when it comes to your mental health?
I really appreciate this question because my first answer is it's ongoing. And sometimes it's taken me longer than I care to admit to understand that something that worked for me even last year might not work for me this year for a number of reasons. And so it's really an ongoing process. But one of the things that I try to do, and I know you know this, Scott, because you listen to the show, which I'm so grateful for. And I love that we're having this chat and that I could reciprocate. But you know that I almost always end the show asking people as a reminder to be kind to themselves and to each other. And a part of that is also to remind me. And I feel like I sometimes say that on the show. I say things sometimes because I need to hear that. And if I need to hear it, my guess is that someone somewhere at some time might need to hear it as well. And so the one thing that I really try to do in my coverage, especially with the podcast, because I do get to know people, air quotes, because they're listening to me, especially when we're in season Monday through Friday. So I try to be honest. I try to be as honest as possible. And sometimes that's uncomfortable because I have to be honest with myself as well. But I really do try to come with honesty and with gratitude. A lot of times I say on the show that I'm just so grateful. It's an honor to be the voice, the first ever voice of Locked On Kraken. And I don't take that for granted for a lot of the reasons that I just discussed in your other great question. And so that's been my approach. And with that honesty, I also have to sometimes be honest that it is a grind to be on a podcast Monday through Friday. It was a super grind. Although it's exciting to cover a playoff team, you're in the playoffs. And so now that Monday through Friday is extended, and I was doing, watch alongs, and, we were also covering the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And so I am still learning. I would not say I'm an expert at this, Scott, but I'm still learning how to also very intentionally set boundaries for myself. And to remind myself that, there's my idea of what is perfect, and then there is what's real. And sometimes those are not the same. And so just trying to show up with gratitude, with honesty, those are the pillars, that's the foundation for how I approach mental health. And talking about things that are real. There are things that are hard to talk about that are happening in hockey, that are happening in the world. And I know not every listener appreciates when I talk about that. But again, I come from realness. I come from honesty. And those things are important for me to talk about in a hockey community. So that's what I do on the show. So those are a few of the ways that I try to, within the context of the show. I mean, there are other things that I do outside of the show or that I try to focus on, like, stretching. And I feel like there was a stretch, no pun intended, a stretch of time where I was literally on the show saying, hey, make sure you're drinking water today. And again, that's because it was a way to remind myself to do that. So those are some of the ways that I approach it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are about wrapping up this interview with Erica, Lindsay, Ayala as we roll on and get closer to our interview with Brock. We'll get to that relive interview momentarily. Again, this is the first break that we already took. We're coming out of that first break and still rolling along with Erica. We will get to Brock when we get into the second break. We're going to do 3 breaks of this show. Our second break is coming up probably around the opening of our interview with Brock. But before we go any further with Erica, as we continue on here, I wanted to stop it here for one moment because it's true. When we talk about mental health, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight this interview. If you listen to Locked On Kraken, like I listen to Locked On Kraken, you often hear Erica say stuff like, be kind to yourself, be kind to one another. Or let me put it this way. If you are like me and you watch a show like Big Brother, you often hear after eviction shows when Julie Chen Moonves is on, love one another, before she ends it saying good night, as she always says. What do I mean by that? Look, life is hard and things happen. Like, I would not say that I am perfect doing this podcast, but I have enjoyed every minute of it and getting to learn through the cracks as cracks come about, as cracks come in, and use those cracks as motivation to figure out, what is working before I can really say, this is great stuff I want to do. This is stuff that I want to continue to do. And maybe there's some ideas I can pick up on in previous interviews that will really spark the pod. So with that said, be kind to yourself as you continue to listen on through this show. Be kind to one another because your kindness that you show to other people, it always has a way of coming back to you. With that said, let's continue on. Yeah, okay. So we're going to get to the outside question in just a second, but we didn't get to it yet. But we've mentioned already the Kraken have made history becoming playoff bound for the first time since they started, which I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, was back in 2020, in 2022, I believe, because 2021 and 2020, they had the bubble going on, and the Kraken were still an expansion team at this time. Just to make
2022 was our first season.
Yeah. So 2021, 2022, first season for the Kraken. And of course, just to let everyone know, the Kraken are now entering their 3rd season as a NHL franchise. And of course, people that Erica has mentioned, Yanni Gorg, Ryan Donato, Matty Beniers, some of these guys I've just mentioned are still with the Kraken. Some of them have left. And of course, the question that we're going to get to now is, this past season, the Kraken have made the playoffs in the first time in franchise history. Of your thoughts on the one playoff series that you enjoyed covering the most. Just give me like one of the playoff series you enjoyed covering the most.
Wow, well, it's hard to choose, but if I had to, I guess I'll just go with the first one, right? Because it's the first ever. And I was at the last regular season game right before the Seattle Kraken were going to enter the postseason. And so I stayed in Seattle and was able to cover the first ever postseason practice for the Seattle Kraken. And the excitement was palpable in the city, in the locker room, but also there was a focus that was also very palpable. So that really stands out to me, that going from that last regular season game at Climate Pledge Arena into the first practice of the postseason stands out to me, where they were getting ready to go up against the defending champions, the Colorado Avalanche. And so that series stands out because obviously the Kraken were successful in that series, and that led to the second series with Dallas. So that's going to be my final answer.
Yes. And just a reminder, if anybody doesn't remember, when the Kraken defeated the Colorado Avalanche, the defending Stanley Cup champions, before the champions were crowned last season, that took the world by storm because nobody had no team had ever taken out the defending Stanley Cup champions in the first round, or any round of that matter, in the history of the NHL. So you want to talk about history? Well, how's this? You make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, and your first opponent is the Stanley Cup champions and the Colorado Avalanche, and you basically defeat them. So again, the Colorado Avalanche were the defending Stanley Cup champions, and they did not finish the playoffs as Stanley Cup champions this year. But that was because of a team that was knocking on the door and is only here to let the NHL know, even though we've only been here for like 2 seasons, now going on our 3rd, you had best believe we'll be a force to be reckoned with. Again, yes, the Kraken beat the Avalanche to make some history. And with that being said, before we get to the 10th and final question, let's jump back into what you can do outside of doing the Locked On Kraken podcast every day of the week. And of course, the Women's Hockey Spotlight every other Friday. And of course, just a disclaimer here for everybody, I'm not too much of an expert at doing podcasts yet, but I've enjoyed doing every little thing I've done. I've enjoyed the interaction with my co-hosts and my brother Thomas and my good friend Ali Moosa, who is also on Spicy Techie with Sienna T. Go check that out if you got some times, or if you got a little bit of time. And anyways, outside of doing the Locked On Kraken podcast every day of the week and the Women's Hockey Spotlight every other Friday on Locked On NHL, I'd like to know, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I feel like when I'm not doing those two things, I'm covering other women's sports. And I have my own women's hockey podcast, the Founding Four podcast, as part of a media company that I also founded called Black Rosie Media, empowering Black women and melanated creators in sports media. So I do that. I cover the WNBA. And most recently, I have transferred my freelancing work, where I was writing for multiple outlets. Now I am a contributor to CBS Sports, where I do some on-air analysis for them through CBS Sports HQ, which is their 24/7 sports digital platform. And I also will be writing for them, which will include NHL coverage. So my free time away from those two podcasts and the Locked On Network is spent doing more sports. But other than sports, I love music. I mentioned I'm one of 3 daughters, so I try to catch up with my family when I'm back in New York, and of course my friends and colleagues. But music is probably what I enjoy the most. Music and just exploring different areas of any city. I travel a lot, so any city that I'm in. And I usually explore through bookstores, through taco spots, and those are some of my favorite things to do when I'm not working.
All right. So if anyone still has any questions after this, could you please tell us how they can reach you, and are you okay with being reachable?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, Scott, that you just shout me a holler on social, and I'll get to you eventually. But the best way, I'm most active on social media under my Lindsay account. So that's ELINDSAY on basically all social media platforms. But if you wanted to reach out for something, if you had a question or anything regarding hockey or the Locked On show and the Seattle Kraken, the best way to directly reach me is at lockedonkraken@gmail.com. So just shoot me an email if you want me on a podcast, or you have a question, or you have some idea that you want us to discuss on the show. That's always the best way.
All right. So we're rounding this out here. And Erica, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you once again for taking some time out of your day to come on to the show and talk some Seattle Kraken and women's hockey on the program. Always great to change up the game plan a little bit, and I hope we get a chance to talk some more Seattle Kraken, or just women's hockey in general again soon. And again, I want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in to another edition of Sports for Beginners. I really do appreciate it. And as we wrap up here, we will say the tagline together. But before we do, as Erica always says, on the Locked On Kraken podcast. We want to remind you to love one another and, of course, to hold fast, stay true. And go ahead, Erica. You get the last line here.
Let's go Kraken.
Let's go Kraken. All right. So with that being said, we also say this tagline together that we say at the end of every show on Sports for Beginners. So from outside of Sports for Beginners with Erica, Lindsay, Ayala, I am your host, Scott McGregor, reminding you, as we always do, that it is never goodbye. It is always never goodbye. It is always until next time. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the interview one-on-one with the one, the only Erica Lindsay Ayala. Be sure to catch her every single day on the Locked On Podcast Network with news and analysis on the Seattle Kraken on Locked On Kraken, Monday through Friday. And as it was portrayed even in the interview, but I portray it a lot when I say it on our podcast, it's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That is what the Locked On Podcast Network is all about. And they have a lot of great shows ranging from Locked On Penguins to Locked On Bills to Locked On Leafs to Locked On Blue Jays, etc., etc. And of course, you can catch Erica and Rachel together on the Locked On Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by Locked On NHL, which can be heard exclusively on Locked On NHL, wherever you listen to on the Locked. Up next on our interview list, we'll check into my conversation with the one and only two-time Paralympian at the time of our recording, I should say, Barack Richardson. Before we get to that, 2 months ago on June the 11th, 2025, our combined podcast that has become its own podcast as of January 2025 reached a milestone on Spotify of 10 streams and downloads. Meanwhile, the podcast itself, Sports for Beginners, making some achievement milestones back in 2024. We made some big milestones in our Spotify coverage. On September 7th, 2024, we surpassed 5,000 plays on Spotify. On October 11th, we surpassed 1,000 plays. On September the 7th, we surpassed 5,000 plays on Spotify for Sports for Beginners. So a lot has happened with our podcast and with the new podcast that we started as a combined podcast until January 2025, when it finally became its own podcast. And in that timeline, we surpassed, in its first year of running, we surpassed 10 streams and downloads for the Weekly in Sports podcast. So we have been hard at work trying to surpass milestones. Speaking of milestones or anniversaries, Penguins fans alike, I would like to give a special shout out to the arena and home of the Black and Gold NHL Hockey Club and wish PPG Paints Arena a happy 15-year birthday. It is PPG Paints Arena's birthday. And as they just posted 1 hour ago, or a few hours ago rather, depending on when you are checking this out, PPG Paints Arena it turned 15 years old today. A tweet from PPG Paints Arena at the time says, "It's a birthday party on Fifth Avenue. 15 years of unforgettable shows, championships, and memories at PPG Paints Arena. Here's to the next 15. What a day for a celebration." All right, so with that being said, happy birthday to PPG Paints Arena. And Congratulations to Susie Cool on her new gig. Susie Cool is new in-arena host for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Congratulations, Susie, on the new gig. In a statement 3 days ago, Susie put out, "And sometimes they say dreams really do come true. Proud, excited, thrilled, emotional, still in disbelief, and most importantly, happy to announce I am the new in-arena host for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now it is time for a hockey night in Pittsburgh." And that's an iconic line I repeat on Penguins postgame a lot because I like to reminisce the late, great Mike Lang. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Brock Richardson and my conversation will kick us off. We will also take a look back at our scoreboard and get you the rest of the Major League Baseball action on tap for this Monday. And then Brock and my conversation will pretty much bring us to the question that will be open to the public when this show hits the air. 2 more breaks, including this one, which will lead us to 1 more break in the program. But when we come back after this break, you'll hear Brock and my conversation when at the time we did not know what the future of the neutral zone was going to be after they were no longer being supported by AMI Audio, or rather Accessible Media Incorporated. That interview, plus we opened the floor for the fans to try and drive the pod into its 4th year. We open up the floor with Brock's interview when we continue. Brock and my conversation kicking us off. Brock and my conversation kicking us off when we continue. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Looking for conversations on the world of broadcasting, sports media, and from time to time, my favorite sports teams? Listen to Broadcast Map with me, Ali Moosa. To learn more about the show and to view the upcoming schedule, like the Broadcast Map Facebook page. Search Broadcast Map. Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Welcome back to episode 24, season 4 of Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Episode 25 comes your way later this week. That will be a NHL/NBA/PWHL and of course MLB program. Speaking of the MLB, we'll get to the scoreboard momentarily. Let's actually tackle that right now. In the MLB, there is a couple of games going on today. You got the Pittsburgh Pirates opening up a 3-game set against the Blue Jays tonight from PNC Park. Not far away from where the Pittsburgh Steelers play at Levi Stadium, I believe that is. I will double check where the Pittsburgh Steelers play, but I know the Pirates play at PNC Park, and I definitely know the Pittsburgh Penguins play inside the now 15 PPG Paints Arena, which turned 15. PPG Paints Arena can confirm that. They sent a tweet out earlier today. The Milwaukee Brewers, as I mentioned off the top of the show, they are currently playing a series with the Cubs. They will play game 2 of a doubleheader later on tonight at 8:05 p.m. Eastern. Ahead of that, we will have a 6:40 p.m. including 6:45 p.m. That includes the Pirates hosting the Blue Jays. The Astros are being hosted by the Tigers. And later at 6:45, the Phillies host the Mariners down in Philadelphia. That's 6:45 p.m. Eastern. At 7:10 and about the 7 o'clock Eastern time mark, the Orioles are in Boston to take on the Red Sox. The White Sox are in Atlanta to take on the Braves. That's at 7:15 p.m. First pitch, Red Sox and Orioles, is at 7:10 p.m. Eastern. Rangers and the Royals getting going at 7:40 p.m. Eastern. Game 2 of the Brewers and Cubbies game goes at 8:05. And that first game is at a 7 lead for the Brewers, heading to the bottom of the 8th inning. The Brewers beating the Cubbies 7-0 right now in Game 1. Game 2 comes your way at 8:05 p.m. Eastern, maybe a bit later. First pitch of Game 1 flew at 2:20 p.m. Eastern, 1:20 p.m. Later on in the evening, the Dodgers visit the Rockies for a first pitch at 8:40 p.m. Then at 9:38 p.m. and 9:40 p.m., the Angels take on the Reds at 9:38. At 9:40 p.m., the Guardians are taking on the Diamondbacks, and the Giants are taking on the Padres. That is the baseball schedule for today. Be sure to join Thomas after Game 1 of this series, or after the series is done in general, for Blue Jays game recap. Blue Jays and the Pirates start a series tonight. First pitch flying just after 6 p.m. tonight. It's at 6:40 p.m. Eastern. Coming up in about 2 hours' time. Well, actually, an hour's time, I should say. Less than 2 hours from now. It is 4:45 p.m. Eastern as we speak with you. Kevin Gosman will get the start against Paul Skeens to open the series. Then it will be Max Scherzer will go against Mitch Keller on Tuesday. On the Wednesday getaway game, it will be Chris Bassett going for the Blue Jays. We don't have on MLB, a starter, I should say, for the Pirates. But big news out of Toronto coming today from Pittsburgh, because that is where the team is right now, the Blue Jays are. Shane Bieber will return to the majors and make his 2025 campaign debut and his Blue Jays debut in the Friday opener against the Marlins. Sportsnet staffs report 1 minute before 4:45 p.m. The Toronto Blue Jays major trade deadline edition is finally set for his club debut. Pitcher Shane Bieber will start on the mound Friday against the Miami Marlins. Manager John Schneider said today, Monday, which is the day we are recording this, Bieber, the 2020 AL Cy Young Award winner, has not pitched in a major league game since April 2024 with the Cleveland Guardians. He then underwent Tommy John surgery for elbow pain, which has sidelined him ever since. The Guardians dealt Bieber to the Blue Jays at the July 3rd deadline in exchange for pitching prospect K. Stephen. Okay, anyways, moving on. In his last full season 2 years ago, Bieber went 6 for 6 with a 3.80 ERA and a WHIP 1.234 over 21 starts with Cleveland, with whom he had previously spent his entire 7-season career. Since joining the Blue Jays, Bieber's made 3 starts with AAA Buffalo, recording an ERA of 2.04 and 16 strikeouts, while allowing just 2 walks over 17 and 2/3 innings. Now 30-year-old being counted on to provide ace-like upside to what has been a steady yet unspectacular Blue Jays rotation. While Toronto starters will remain on turn through a series against the Pittsburgh Pirates prior to Bieber's debut, it remains unclear how the club will handle its rotation moving forward. That raises question. Are the Jays going to go to a six-man rotation? Who is going to go to the bullpen? Who is going to go to Buffalo? Who could get dropped, or rather DFA'd? Question is, are the Blue Jays going to go to a six-man rotation? Are they? I don't know. What we do know is that the Jays will go on turn with Kevin Gausman, Max Scherzer, and Chris Bassett going in the Pittsburgh Pirates series. The question remains, which of the five-some starters could end up in the bullpen when Bieber makes his debut on Friday? So I don't know. I really don't know. I think if anything, Eric Lauer is probably going to go to the bullpen. I think it's going to be Eric Lauer. I really do. All right, let's get to the feature interview. We'll get to the episode ranking momentarily. This is our second of two feature interviews, and this one was at a time when we did not know what the future hold. I should say what the future held for the Neutral Zone podcast. Brock Richardson is a two-time Paralympian, and he was one of the first people from the Neutral Zone and first Paralympians that we have had on Sports for Beginners. Enjoy the interview. We'll come back midway through for a episode ranking tally and wrap up our show after our final break of the show with the remainder of Brock's interview. And I want to remind you that another question that will be answered after the final break of the show is when the listeners will be able to take control of the pod. That's right. As soon as this episode hits the air, you have control. You, the listeners, will have control of our podcast. Send me an email at sportsforbeginnerspodcast80 with what you would like me to cover, if there was a guest you would like me to track down, etc., etc. You'll find out more about it after we hit our final break. But to get there, let's get a little bit in from another previous season episode in another previous season. This one was in episode 30 of season number 2, and this was our first ever one-on-one conversation with Brock Richardson, a two-time Paralympian. Enjoy. Welcome to a special edition of Sports for Beginners, the podcast, episode number 30 of our second season. I am indeed your host, Scott McGregor. Joining me today in the studio, our co-hosts Thomas and Ali are not joining me today, but joining me today in the studio is the host of the Accessible Media Incorporated sports podcast for Parasports. He is a two-time Paralympian. And again, as I said before, he is the host of the Parasports podcast, The Neutral Zone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the studio, making his Sports for Beginners debut. Please welcome Brock Richardson. Brock, I just wanted to thank you for coming into the studio here today to take some time out of your day to come on and talk para sports with me. And of course, we'll talk other sports as well. How are you doing today? Welcome to the program. Honestly, I know it's been a really emotional time, especially with the Neutral Zone ending on Tuesday, August the 29th, 2023. So we won't get into too much there, but I'm going to throw it over to you before we get started with questions.
Yeah, I'm doing well. All things considered, as you mentioned, we just finished our 6-year run with the Neutral Zone on AMI, but I'm confident that it's not necessarily the end. It's just the end of a time period, as we worked with AMI for a while. But it's to be in this business and be doing something for as long as we have, 6 years time. You can't be too upset about something, because a lot of shows don't necessarily make a run for so long. So greatly appreciated AMI and what they did for us, but onward and upward to new and different things.
All right. So, as I mentioned to you before we came on here, there are no preset questions here, but that's because we're going to try something here that I think has worked out for Ali Moosa's podcast, All Over the Map, which is at the end of our show, before we get to the contact stuff, we're going to talk about if the guest has anything to ask the host. So let's get started. And first question I want to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what it's been like being at AMI?
So my upbringing, I am the youngest of three siblings, and two of us have disabilities. My sister has a hidden disability, if you will, and then I have a physical disability. So it was kind of different in our household, but my parents raised us both, to do anything you wanted to do, regardless of your disability. And so I was always interested in radio and broadcasting, and so I took the Accessible Voice for All broadcasting course through Connect for Life, which was a really life-changing experience, and got to interview some really high-profile people during that time, and then got to bring the Neutral Zone to AMI. It was just simply one of those things where I had a meeting with the manager of AMI Audio and said, hey, this is an idea, and he took it, and we did it for 3 months towards the end of their fiscal year in 2017, and then we were continued on right until 2023 at the end of August. Yeah, that's kind of a little synopsis of what's happened with me.
All right. Yes, and I understand that you've had your panel of experts. Well, I guess I wouldn't call them experts, but your panel of people that you talk with every Tuesday on AMI. When you do the Neutral Zone, you've had Cam Jenkins, you've had Joshua Watson, you've had Clearview Cannon, a lot of great people that were involved in this. And I noticed in the last episode that you gave a couple of shout outs to Melanie, and you gave definitely a shout out to Voices for Ability Radio, which apparently was where, according to your episode, that was where the Neutral Zone started. So one of my other questions around that is, if you hadn't started the Neutral Zone, what other podcast would you have done? Which of course that's what you did, but specifically what I'm asking is, if you did not do the Neutral Zone, was there another idea that you had that you would like to do if you didn't go through with the Neutral Zone?
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time with Voices for Ability as their station manager, so I got to do a few things in addition to the sports, the Neutral Zone, and one of those things was I got to do their ability panel, where you would have different people of various disabilities, whether spinal cord injury, mental disability, whatever the case may be. We had all kinds of different people, and so we would put a topic on the table and discuss a topic. So it usually was disability related, and we would usually talk about things like, how do you function on a daily basis with different disabilities. And so I really enjoyed doing that. Plus I did some headline shows where it was almost like a news broadcast, where me and one of the other interns, we recorded some news headlines and talked about the news headlines. I enjoyed doing both of those things, but sports is obviously my love and passion, so that's where I stayed. But those were kind of two options that, if this didn't work out, I would have continued doing the ability panel or maybe some news headlines. But like I said, sports is where I land.
All right. And that's kind of where I landed as well. We'll get into how Sports for Beginners got started as well. But that actually, through the same program that you mentioned, an accessible voice in broadcasting, that was the course that was called when I actually joined it. That was actually how we kind of met with all the other people that were in the class that my brother and I were in when we were doing it. And by the way, it's important to note that it was a 20-week program that ran from April to August of 2022. I don't know if they're running the program anymore, but they had other different programs when it comes to speechcraft. They've had so many different programs for people who are interested to check out Connect for Life. But again, Brock went with the neutral zone, and as he mentioned, the neutral zone, it may be done for now, but it's probably not the end of the neutral zone, despite its 6-year run with AMI. And we will actually have a link in the show notes to the grand finale episode that is available right now wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. So if you are checking this out on YouTube, welcome. It's on our YouTube channel for Sports for Beginners podcast. It is for the Weekly in Sports YouTube channel. That is where you'll be able to find it. Regardless, let's talk a little para sports for a second. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about the PWHL, which is just starting up. That's the new women's hockey league that's starting up. Now, there's not a lot that we know, but we do know right now the draft order of their draft, which I believe won't take place until just before November, and their free agency is going to open up, or probably did open up earlier today. It was announced though that we have an original 6 of teams. We have 6 cities that are now the original 6 of the PWHL, which by the way is the short form for Professional Women's Hockey League, which will be dropping the puck in January of 2024. So that will be next year. Brock, I want to get your thoughts on the teams, rather the cities that are involved. So what do you think of the teams the cities that are involved with the original 6 for the women's new hockey league? They are Toronto, Minnesota, Montreal, just to name a few, but there's so many more.
Yeah, I think all those markets that have been announced are bigger markets, which is exactly where you want to have these sports represented. I think women's hockey is a wonderful game to watch. We've seen it with the Olympic Games where people will come and watch. I think because now we're in a world where it can be more publicized and quicker access, I think you're going to see more success than the previous women's league that they had. But I think this one is going to be one that will be better, because just on the simple basis of being able to quickly access the games and being so many channels that are able to carry it, I think it's going to be good. And I strongly suggest that people support women's hockey, because it's just as good as the NHL, and I think people should support it.
Yes. And one more thing to touch here on the PWHL, the names of the 6 general managers as teams begin their roster construction as they get ready for January 2024. A date on the season in January is yet to be determined, but I'll go over before we get into more sports talk here, I'll go over the Professional Women's Hockey League announced general managers, which were announced today, and Sportsnet staff reports the new Professional Hockey or Women's Hockey League announced on Friday, that's today, the 6 general managers for its inaugural season, which include Gina Kingsbury for Toronto, Danielle Zabagi, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Danielle. I apologize for that. She will handle duties in Montreal as the GM. The GM for Ottawa is Michael Hirschfield. Natalia Darwitz handles things for Minnesota. For Boston, it'll be Danielle Marmer. Hopefully I'm saying that right. If I'm not saying that right, I apologize in advance. And last but certainly not least, the market in New York. The general manager is Pascal Deaus. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Again, if I mentioned any last names of the general managers wrong, I extremely apologize for any wrong pronunciations. Extremely, I apologize. But those are the names of the 6 general managers that were named today on September the 1st. 2023. When we look at the way, we'll come back to our interview with Brock in just a few moments. But first, it's time for our last commercial break of the show. And after that commercial break, things will start to wrap up with Brock, myself, our conversation. Our episode rankings will kick us off before we get back to the interview with Brock. And then our floor is open to listener. Is there someone you would like to hear on this podcast? Someone that you would like me to track down for an interview to be had on this show? Whatever the case may be, shoot me an email. Sports for Beginners podcast 8010. Shoot me an email. Sports for Beginners podcast gmail.com. We come back and wrap up our celebration with more from my interview with Brock Richardson, the episode ranking, and more of how you can get involved to drive the podcast as we enter year number 4. Our first episode of our 2-week episode drop concludes right after this. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
CNT Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on CNT Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on CNT Radio.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Blue Jays Pirates coming up in moments. They are coming up at 6:40 p.m. Eastern. It is 5:30 p.m. Eastern. As previously mentioned, the Brewers are playing a doubleheader today. They will play game 2 at 8:05 p.m. Eastern. Game ended, and that was a Brewers 7-0 shutout win. So the Brewers have started a new winning streak. Their 14-game winning streak ended yesterday at the hands of a 3-2 10-inning loss, 3-2 10-inning loss to the Cincinnati Reds, who take on the Los Angeles Angels later tonight. Of those games, minus Pirates and Blue Jays, we will have Astros and Tigers coming up, as well as Phillies, Mariners, Orioles, Red Sox still to come, White Sox, Braves, Rangers, Royals, Dodgers, Rockies, the Reds and the Angels, as I mentioned, coming up later tonight, Guardians and the Diamondbacks, and Padres and Giants as well, also coming up later in the evening. Brewers and the Cubs have played one game of their doubleheader. Game 2 goes at 8:05 p.m. Eastern. The starters for those games are James Tallien for the Cubs. He will go against Chad Patrick. Those are the probables for that game, but those could change. We will see. All right, quickly here, before we get back to the interview, take a look at our top 10 episode ranking on our 3-year anniversary show. I will not share my screen for this part, but that's okay. Our top 10 episodes include our Penguins post game featuring the Pittsburgh Penguins and the St. Louis Blues from a few seasons ago, 2 seasons ago, with 36 plays. At number 2, another Penguins postgame that is at 32 plays. That is the Penguins and the Coyotes. Coyotes were taken over by the team now known to the world as Utah Mammoth. The Coyotes were taken over by the Utah Mammoth when Utah was starting out and started out as the Utah Hockey Club, which is how they would go in their inaugural season, I should say. Another Penguins postgame also in there is Senators and the Penguins, that with 31 plays, tied with Jose Bautista Honor News. That was a two-parter show. We had Thomas on for part 1, Ali on for part 2. So Thomas was on for part 1, and our friend Ali was on for part 2. One of those parts has 31 plays. Speaking of Ali and Thomas, that show that we did together with them, the first show we ever did, which we recorded on this specific day, which was a Thursday in 2022, in the year 2022, on this specific day, August 8th, 2022. That episode also has 31 plays, a two-way tie with 29 plays between Season 2 of the podcast, Episode 3, and Penguins Postgame Devils Penguins, both of those shows with 29 plays each. Lakers and Raptors at the bottom of the barrel with 20 in our top 10 episodes. And with 28 episode plays each, we have our Blue Jays game recap, regular season preview show that we did, and the Penguins post-game show where we had a final showdown of the 2024-2025 season. Who was in that game? Find out by checking out the episode. And speaking of checking out episodes, we have had a number of episodes drop as of late. We actually have more episodes out than we would like, but that's the thing about growing the show. We definitely have more than 10 episodes on this podcast alone out. One of our new goals now is being eligible to be monetized, and we're not quite there yet, but we're working our way, which means we need your help. Listeners, we need your help. Tell everyone you know that we are running a podcast called Sports for Beginners. Tell everyone you know. We would love to be sponsored by any different network willing to take us. We'd also like to inform you that we are making our own network, but would encourage for sponsors anything to help us improve the pod. Is there a guest you would like us to track down? Is there someone that you would like to hear on the podcast? Maybe you want Ali to return. Maybe you want an episode where Thomas and I talk a little sports together. Maybe you want Ali and I to talk a little sports together. Maybe you're looking for a little female content. I'm happy to oblige in any way I can. With that said, let's get back to our featured interview. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where, since I've asked those questions, the floor is open to you, the listeners. It's time to find out what our listeners are enjoying as to what episodes we will be creating in the future. No hesitation to change up the game plan week to week. Our goal has been to put episodes on Sports for Beginners out on a week-to-week basis, specifically on Fridays, and weekly in sports. The goal is to keep that running monthly, now that that is its own podcast. But without further ado, let's go back to our second featured interview. We'll close out with one of Ali's voice messages before our current hosting platform refrained from doing that. But if you still want to send us a note, you can do so via comments. You can also send it via email, sportsforbeginnerspodcast8231@gmail.com. We are still on Discord, so if you want to check out the Discord server, there will be a link in the description of our episode for you to join. And we are also, for those experiencing, if you are on Discord and you're experiencing accessibility issues, we also have opened up a WhatsApp group that we called Sports for Beginners Network. The Sports for Beginners Network. I'll be adding new chats to that group community for your eyes only, where you will be able to interact with us before we go on to our show recording. During baseball games, football games, hockey games, etc., we will be able to interact with you through that way. If you are interacting with us on Discord but experiencing accessibility issues, we will interact with you on WhatsApp. We may also interact with you on Facebook Messenger. But that's something to come down the line. It's not a bad idea, but we might start doing that. All right, without further ado, this interview with Brock is at the 15-minute and 47-second mark. So we will continue on through that, and then we will close out with our closing words. Hope you've enjoyed the celebration as much as I have as well. Okay, I know I may not have shown it through some of my facial expressions, but that's okay. And we've also had some breaking news in between interviews, and that's going to happen. So we will see what else breaks and what else comes around. Reminder, Blue Jays open a series with the Pirates in PNC Park tonight. Thomas will likely be with you for Blue Jays game recap, either after the series or one by one after each game. We will see. But the good news is, as you heard on this podcast and might have seen on Sportsnet, Shane Bieber will make his 2025 and Blue Jays debut Friday versus Miami when the Blue Jays take on the Marlins. And one final thing, George Springer recently returned to the lineup ahead of the Pirates series, and he did play against the Texas Rangers. A voice message from Ali following our closing moments and our closing message. But first, the continuation of my one-on-one conversation with Brock Richardson. Enjoy. The Maple Leafs were run. Are you surprised that some of the NHL former hockey players or broadcasters for this sake, are you surprised that some of them might be, well, okay, I don't know what's going to go down, but and neither do you, but I guess let's just say, are you surprised that some of the teams for the Maple Leafs, the Penguins, or anything like that, like, are you surprised that some of the men were very excited when this announcement came out that the women were getting a professional hockey league?
I think so. I think that, people understand the value of hockey in Canada. And I mean, you think of the likes of, Cassie Campbell-Pascal, Haley Wickenheiser, just to name a few in Canada. I think that most people really do recognize that, this is a good thing. Although having said that, I also would say a lot of people just kind of focus on their own, what they have to do. And so even though they might be happy, they kind of go on as business as usual and just kind of carry on. I was hoping that the NHL would be more involved in supporting the women's hockey league, but it seems that just has kind of gone by the wayside, which is fine. But I was hoping that would help kickstart the women's game for sure.
For sure. Well, again, just a reminder, and if you like hockey and you're female, or if you just like hockey in general, for whatever gender it is, I kindly suggest that you mark your January calendar for whenever a date is announced. But they will be dropping the puck in January, and we will see if we can get host of Locked On Kraken, Lindsay, Ayala, back on the program to talk women's hockey. Erica is the founder of Black Rosie Media. She is also one of the hosts of the Friday show, the bi-weekly segment of Locked On NHL called Women's Hockey Spotlight. So make sure you tune into that to get all of the details you possibly can. And Erica, if you're listening to this, I really enjoyed our conversation that we had, and I look forward to talking more Kraken with you and more women's hockey in general. How about this, Brock? I did want to get your thoughts on as we move into our third question here, I did want to get your thoughts on Auston Matthews being signed back to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Despite the fact that he never left, apparently he was under contract, I think, and the Maple Leafs this offseason, they did sign him. And now there's stuff around that says perhaps they get rid of William Nylander. Maybe they'll keep Mitch Marner. What are your thoughts on Matthews getting signed?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. First of all, am I happy that Auston Matthews got signed? Absolutely. As a Leaf fan, sure, you want that talent to be in your team for sure. This means, as you sort of mentioned, this means that they are currently over the salary cap as we sit here on September the 1st. But they're going to have to do something. And the name that you brought up is William Nylander. And I know that people will sit here and say, yeah, he was the most productive person, for the Leafs in the playoffs. But somebody has to go. And to me, if I'm a betting man, I would say that William Nylander is the guy to go. Now, Auston Matthews has to live up to what he's being paid. He's being paid $13.25 million as an average annual salary, and that's a lot of money. You're now the highest paid athlete in the game right now. You have to live up to that, and so far in the playoffs, I haven't seen that from Auston, and I would just hope that we see that from him. But it's nice to have somebody, your cornerstone, locked up for the future.
It is. All right. So let's get back to some para sports, and of course, you're a Paralympian, so we're not going to talk too much about para sports, but I do want to get it from the Paralympian athlete status. So if you're okay with it, what was it like when you were an athlete for para sports? And given the fact that the intro on the neutral zone says you're a two-time Paralympian, I just wanted to ask, what was it like as a Paralympian, flipping from the athlete side to doing a podcast around it and around sports in general?
Yeah, being an athlete is something I'll never forget. That's part of the reason why I wanted to get involved in the media, and I'll explain why in just a second. But, representing your country is something that everyone strives to be, and it goes back to my parents telling us, you can be anyone you want to be and be successful. And so when I got involved in sports, I gave everything I could and went to Beijing in 2008 and London in 2012 for the two Paralympic Games. For me, I think the beginning of the drive towards the media side of things was our sport wasn't represented very well in the media. We played bocce, which is similar to lawn bowling, for those of you that have an understanding of lawn bowling, and the media never really covered it. And it was my goal when I retired for all para sports to get more coverage, and we've accomplished that. A lot of buy-in from people who enjoyed the program. We also love talking mainstream sports, but the initial goal for me was, when I was an athlete, it was like, I got to change some of this because para sports isn't represented the same way as mainstream sports is. And it's really unfortunate because those athletes train as hard as professional athletes, if not even harder, I would argue, because of their level of disability and the things that they have to overcome in order to be a successful athlete.
Yes. And if anyone has any interest in covering para sports, especially in the big markets for Sportsnet, TSN, Net, that of course has changed. So for any of the big markets, whether it's in Pittsburgh, in the United States, in Canada, anywhere in the world, if you guys have anything you want to talk about with para sports, it would all be greatly appreciated for the sports, especially for those who are Paralympians. So, with that all being said, one final question here before we get to all of the fun stuff, including contact information and all that. I do want to ask, and I know people are probably wondering this, so getting the chance to talk to you, do you have anything that you would like to share with regards to the neutral zone as to what will be happening, or do you have anything that you're able to say publicly? Anything that you're able to share would be nice.
Yeah. I can share as much as I know as we sit here on September 1st. All of us, we're all committed to the neutral zone. We're all committed to what it stands for, and that stands to be true. But I will tell you that we're going to do it at the very least as an independent podcast. If nobody decides to pick it up or sponsor the podcast, we will be doing it as an independent podcast because we believe 100% into what we're doing. And step one is just continuing the brand of the neutral zone. And AMI was extremely, extremely gracious in being able to allow us to continue on with the brand because we brought the brand to AMI. We brought the neutral zone to AMI. And so they're doing in my opinion, the gracious thing and saying, this is your brand. We can move away from it. And I think that's helpful because we have a following and we would like to keep that following with the neutral zone brand. And I think it's hard when you start a new brand to keep that same following. So I'm very happy to see that we've been able to do this. I can tell you without a doubt, we are committed to doing something with the neutral zone.
It is indeed not the end. Brock, do you have anything you'd like to ask me as we wrap up here?
One, who's been your favorite guest to interview? And two, who would you like to get on your podcast that you have not yet?
Oh, wow. I mean, there have been a ton of guests that I've had since we started, but I think my favorite guest by far, at least at this moment, and everybody, I enjoy whoever has been able to come on to this podcast. I enjoy it very much. But I think I got to give credit to Ryan Talbot, host of Shout a Buffalo Football podcast. It was a really, really great conversation. Wasn't a one-on-one conversation like we're doing right now, but it was definitely a great conversation talking Bills, talking NFL in general. It was a really, really great conversation with Ryan Talbot. Some great content coming up on Shout as well. So whether you're just a football fan in general or you love the Bills, definitely go check them out. And when it comes to a guest that I would love to have on this podcast, we've had a few Locked On podcast hosts on the show. So if I'm sticking to the Buffalo Bills, I definitely would like to have Joe Marino on, host of Locked On Bills and co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. I would also love to have the longtime radio voice of the Blue Jays and now podcaster for the Blue Jays at the Toronto Star, Mike Wilner, back on. I mean, Mike and I did an interview before we actually got Sports for Beginners up and running. If we could do one with Mike for the actual podcast, that would be excellent. I would really love to hear a little bit more. And you know what? Maybe I would love to have, Joshua on to get his view on the neutral zone.
Yeah, I mean, all of those sound really good people to have on. I mean, I know that when I was in school, I always dreamed and desired to have the one and only Bob McCowan on for a project. And it literally just took an email to his producer, who at the time was Ryan Walsh, and I sent an email, and we did the interview, and it was a really good time. And so, needless to say, anyone that you want to interview, it just takes a tweet, an email, and the worst they're going to say is no. But if you don't try, you never know.
Indeed. All right. Well, that will pretty much wrap this show up. Where can the good people find you on social media? And before you answer, I will say that we will be having our end of the month August show of the Sports for Beginners Combined podcast, Weekly in Sports. We're talking more PWHL. We're talking news around the Pittsburgh Penguins. We're talking what we can expect from week 1 for the Buffalo Bills and some much top and so much more. And of course, the Bills and Miami Dolphins content will be coming this September. It all begins on Sunday, the 10th of September, because on the 11th of September, the Buffalo Bills content returns with Bills pregame, and we will have Bills postgame on Tuesday, September 12th, right after the Bills go to battle with the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers. So where can the good people find you, Brock?
They can find me
social.
They can find me on social media, on X, if that's what you're referring to it now. It's still hard time rolling that one off my tongue, but anyway. On X, they can reach me at @NeutralZoneBR, and I will be very active. I'm very good at responding, so if you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am at @NeutralZoneBR.
All right, and you can follow me on Twitter or X, however you want to call it. I call it Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram and Threads at SMC_87_. Again, that's on Instagram and Threads. It's another personal account. It's not a podcast account. We'll get a podcast account going for that eventually. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook by searching Sports for Beginners podcast on your Facebook browser and clicking the follow there. We are available on YouTube. You can go to Weekly in Sports with Scott with the YouTube channel. And if you're on the YouTube channel listening to this interview, if it does go on here, hello, please like, comment, and subscribe with your feedback, and we will get to you. You can email us at sportsforbeginners podcast8231@gmail.com. And of course, you can also send me a message on Facebook, but please let me know who you are so I know who I'm dealing with. And with that, we have just about a minute left here, so we're going to wrap up here. As we always remind you here on Sports for Beginners with Brock Richardson, my name is Scott McGregor, and that will do it for our show. My name is Scott McGregor. Before we sign off, a quick look at the starting lineup for tonight's baseball game. The first game of a 3-game set features Kevin Gossman against Paul Skeens. For John Schneider's Blue Jays, we'll start off with how it goes defensively. Catching Gossman today will be Tyler Heineman. He will be behind the plate. In the outfield, we will have Barger in right, Addison Barger in right. Dalton Varsho will be in center field, and Nathan Lukes will be in left field, besides Tyler Heineman, who will be behind the plate. At third base, Ernie Clement. At second base, Andres Jimenez. Andres Jimenez will be our second baseman. First baseman is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And the shortstop alongside second baseman Andres Jimenez. The shortstop for the Blue Jays is Bo Bichette. The designated hitter who will lead off for the Blue Jays is George Springer. For the Pirates, managed by Don Kelly, their defensive alignment out in the outfield looks like this. In right field, Brian Reynolds. In center field, they will go with Alexander Canario in center. And in left field, opposite right field, which is controlled by Brian Reynolds, it will be Tommy Pham. Designated hitter is Andrew McCutcheon. First baseman will be Spencer Horwitz. At second base, it is Nick Gonzalez. Shortstop is Jared Triolo. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is the third baseman. And catching Paul Skeens tonight will be Henry Davis. All right, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the ball game. We'll be back with you on Thursday for our scheduled Friday drop episode, talking Blue Jays, talking NHL, PWHL, and NBA as well, specifically based on games. Excited to see the Raptors play in the 2025-2026 season. That'll do it for our 3-year anniversary episode. Thank you so much for being with us. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Love one another and be kind to yourself. I will catch you on the flip side on the next episode of Sports for Beginners. Until then, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Sports for Beginners. If you would like to learn more about the show, you can visit the podcast Facebook page or visit the official website. You can also send us an email at sportsforbeginnerspodcast8231@gmail.com. As we always remind you, it is not goodbye, it is until next time.
Hi, Scott. It's Ali here. I just wanted to mention that I'm really enjoying the show and I'm really enjoying what you're putting together. And I wanted to just say I'm enjoying being a part of it as well. So please keep up the phenomenal work and make sure you guys keep this podcast going because it really suits you well.